Tonight on the Hinckley Report, Vice presidential candidates Tim Kaine and Mike Pence faced off in a surprisingly lively debate. The two sparred over abortion, religion, and their running mates' records. Was Pence able to stop the bleeding after a turbulent week for the Trump campaign? How are Utahns reacting to Trump's leaked 1995 tax returns and his late-night Twitter feed? Kaine's aggressive debate style drew mixed reviews. Will his approach help or hurt Clinton's post-debate bump? Tonight, we are talking presidential politics with the Utah perspective. In local politics, Charlene Albaran and Chris Stewart locked horns in the second congressional debate. Who had the biggest gaffe, and how will it play with Utah voters?
I just want you to be honest with me.
I'm always
honest. You say that.
I'm always honest. I don't know about you.
On this one thing, I don't think you are.
Gary Herbert and Mike Weinhold sat down for a candid policy discussion. How do their plans differ on education, taxes, and marijuana? Finally, which public figures have the highest and lowest favorability ratings among Utahns? We will be diving into a recent Hinckley Tribune poll to answer these questions and more. Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report, a weekly roundup of the most pressing political issues and how they relate to Utah. Our aim is to elevate the dialogue surrounding elections, government, and the policies impacting our state. Covering the week, we have Robert Gerke, political reporter for the Salt Lake Tribune, Heidi Hatch, anchor for Channel 2 News, and Max Roth, anchor and political reporter for Fox 13 News. We're so glad to have you all with us. Let's start tonight with the vice presidential debate. It was one that was so interesting. When you talk about the vice presidential candidates, sometimes it's kind of like the Hippocratic Oath of doctors. Your job is to do no harm. Yeah. Max, let's start with you. Did either of these candidates do any harm to the top of the ticket this week?
You know, I'm interested in what the other folks on the panel think about this, but in my mind, it was clear that Pence won the 90 minutes of debating. But I think that Kaine actually followed the Hippocratic Oath better than Pence did, because Kaine was on topic with his running mate. And with Pence, you see this person who probably did himself a lot of favors, but he also said a lot of things that run counter to what Donald Trump thinks. For example, he immediately jumped on Tim Kaine and Hillary Clinton about Russia and about bowing to, kind of allowing Russia to get some supremacy in Syria and the Middle East. That's something that clearly is different from the way that Donald Trump approaches that issue. And so as those things go forward, I think Pence did not support his candidate as well as Kaine did.
Do you think that's
but
true?
Wasn't Kaine unhinged, though? I felt he was the Donald Trump of that interview. He came in there and he didn't have the control that Pence had, and I think that that's where Pence won, is that he was much more in control of the situation. He wasn't taking the bait like Trump was. And so I think Kaine came off as a little bit crazy, and you could tell that he had been prepped significantly, just like Hillary Clinton was. He had his lines he was supposed to get in, but he wasn't getting them in at the right time.
It was awkward, wasn't it?
It was forced and weird.
Yeah. The constant interruption probably came off poorly on television.
Yeah.
But I think going to what Max said, the Clinton campaign was quick. The next day had a TV ad out with all of the inconsistencies between what the denials from Mike Pence about things that Donald Trump had said, coupled with the video of Donald Trump saying those things. It completely undermined what he was trying to say. And to your point about Syria, I mean, there was a question to the campaign spokesman the next day, or the same day, I think, saying, you know, does Donald Trump agree with Mike Pence on Syria? And he's like, I have to check and get back to you. You know, he went off script a little bit more. But, you know, I think to Heidi's point, I think on the night, Mike Pence looked more in control, more, you know, more leadership, he looked stronger. Whether it matters, going to the original question, I think is a legitimate question, because it was a bad week for Trump. They were looking to this to try to sort of staunch the bleeding. It probably helped some, but again, the ratings for this are about half as many people as watched the presidential debate, so it's hard to say how much impact it's going to have.
But I think people are watching this year because they want some kind of justification. So if you're sort of voting for Hillary or sort of voting for Trump, I think people were watching it going, okay, I'm going to calm my nerves. This person's going to be holding their hand when they're making big decisions.
Do you think that worked? So people who may not be loving the top of the ticket, right? So maybe that's a lot of people in the state of Utah, if you look at the polling numbers, maybe they're looking at the vice presidential candidate. Do you think either one of these candidates in that debate gave Utahns hope that maybe I'm okay with the person at the top?
I don't know about Utahns. I don't know about Utahns as a whole. I know a lot of Utah politicians and folks that I'm sure you two have talked to and who I have talked to. They take some comfort from the Pence pick. They take some cover from the Pence pick, where they can say, you know, Trump is relatively unpopular in Utah. He's going to win Utah most likely, but by less than a majority of the vote. So a majority of Utahns are going to vote against the Republican ticket, most likely from what we see in the polls. So Republicans in Utah who want to toe the party line, but who also recognize that Utahns tend not to like Trump so much, they say, I support the Pence-Trump ticket.
A little justification.
It's the blueprint that Governor Herbert's laid out. It's like, hey, he's going to support the ticket. He supports Mike Pence. He talks about the good things Mike Pence has done, and then, you know, doesn't have to talk about the things Donald Trump has done. But I think, by and large, people don't vote for the vice president. I don't think anybody voted for Joe Biden over Paul Ryan
and Paul Ryan.
You know, and so I think it's the top of the ticket that matters.
Well, when you start talking about style, Heidi, you got to this just a little bit. Why don't you talk about that? When Donald Trump had his first foray here on the first debate, there was this big media report. He interrupted 51 times. And everyone said, I can't believe he would do that. And that was what we talked about, the style. In this one, it was Tim Kaine. 70 times he interrupted in this particular one. What kind of impact did that have, and why do you think he took that strategy?
I'm not sure why he took the strategy. I think there are times to interrupt, and I think that if they're saying something that's completely off base and you need to interrupt them, but I feel like it's sort of like using the F-bomb. You should never use that, right? But if you're going to use it sparingly when you use it. Make sure that people know you mean it. You know what I'm saying? Because if you're constantly interrupting, it's just like, make it stop. But if you use that very sparingly and when you use it, people know that it's for an important reason, then fine. But yeah, don't say the F word,
I
though.
think the format of it.
That was not the message we got.
I think the format of this debate lent itself, because there was supposed to be a discussion period where they were encouraged basically to talk over each other, and so I think that it lent itself to that a little bit more. I think the moderator was a little bit more hands-off, even more hands-off to say than Lester Holt was, and I do think that Tim Kaine, his strategy was to try to pin Mike Pence down to the Donald Trump positions. And so every time Mike Pence tried to not answer the question or tried to avoid the issue that Tim Kaine was raising, he did try to go back to it. Now, it came off as sort of, you know, snipey and it didn't chirpy, I guess, and it didn't really have the impact I think he was trying to go for.
It's kind of like Tim Kaine went to be in a boxing match, and it turns out the guy across the ring was a kung fu fighter, you know. And so Tim Kaine was throwing all of these punches, and Mike Pence just kept on rolling away from him, and doing this thing where it's like, you know, where he smiled and nodded and showed that suave, you know, kind of cool demeanor, and essentially didn't bite.
I think he was trying to bait him a lot like Hillary was trying to bait Trump, and Trump took the bait. I mean, you see it on Twitter all the time. Somebody says something to him and he can't help but fight back, but Pence had significantly more control. So obviously he had the bait, but just wasn't taking it.
But I kind of wonder why Tim Kaine felt like he needed to be the aggressor. His candidate's up in the polls. He doesn't need to land any punches. He just needs to hang back and not hurt himself. And from what we're all saying here, from what the pundits nationally have said, you know, he kind of did. I mean, and so there was really no reason for him to be the guy who was going after Mike Pence. He could have just hung back and you know, scored his points and gone out of there with a tie. And
one thing that is not really pointed out a lot on Mike Pence's resume is that he was a talk show host before he was a representative and governor. And you know, you kind of get that sense when the cameras go on. I tell everybody, half of my vocabulary disappears. And it's, you know, it's nervous even for those of us who are used to it. And you get Mike Pence is used to it. Tim Kaine, I think he was nervous.
I thought you just meant the F word disappears.
I apparently have no filter. I'm much like Donald Trump. I say what I want on TV.
That's not
it's
in my vocabulary.
We don't know what you're talking about there. But let's ask about that, because it's true. Pence has a lot of experience with the media for sure. But what do you say to those people, maybe Max and Heidi follow up on this, for people who said, you should have maybe handled some of those attacks. Maybe you should have tried to correct the record where it was instead of maybe just ignoring it, maybe tackling it. Why didn't he?
That's a good question. I feel like he should. Partially, I'm frustrated by the vice presidential debate because all they are is there to defend the top of the ticket. And I think in some regards, we'd like to hear them, whether to correct information or just give your opinion of who you are or where you stand on the issue. So it's this weird dance. It's like not even a debate where they're debating their own things, defending. So yeah, why not correct? Why not say, I feel this way, they feel this way, and lay some actual information down? But I feel like it's just this odd dance in any election year.
Yeah, and you think, I mean, let's go with my boxing kung fu fighter analogy.
That was so good.
Wasn't it amazing? So the kung fu fighter is in a tag team with some like World Wrestling Entertainment guy. You know, I mean, he is. Hillary Clinton has a very traditional campaign, and so a vice president can defend that campaign very traditionally. There are lots of issue positions. You go to the website and it's all outlined very clearly. Donald Trump is a force unto himself. And so it must be the hardest job in America to be the vice presidential candidate because it's not there aren't those clear policy positions.
Well, maybe that's why maybe they weren't entirely clear. And there's some of those when you start talking about immigration issues or the complete Muslim ban, which maybe that was a complete change. No, that's not where we are anymore. So maybe it has changed a little bit. Did you see that, Heidi?
Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem is just keeping up with what it is. And I think in some regards, I remember talking to John Huntsman, the former governor, about this, that oftentimes when you get into that original trying to get your party's vote and get the nomination, you're throwing red meat out and you're trying to say, I'm building walls and I'm keeping all Muslims out. And then you have to actually try to get nominated or win the entire country, and you step it all back. And so yeah, now they're like, okay, well, how do we unwind this a little bit? And yeah, it's a weird position.
Well, and Trump's unique though, because everybody talked about the pivot that everybody expected to have, and it's never come. And even on immigration in particular, he made that trip to Mexico, tried to tone down his rhetoric, and then that night had a press conference in Arizona where he talked about building the wall and deporting these people. And so, you know, on the deportation force, and Mike Pence dodged that question, and the moderator didn't hold him to, you know, make him answer it, but the record shows that that's where Donald Trump is. And so he did, I think he didn't want to sort of, in a national setting, be tied to some of those positions and reiterate and strengthen or, you know, add more fuel to those positions, because, you know, if you can soft pedal it and kind of, you know, sort of sidestep it, as Max said, then it's not going to be the story of the debate.
Let's keep on you on the sidestep question for just a moment, because we have a town hall debate coming up on Sunday. And it's much more difficult to sidestep a question that comes straight from a voter, straight from the audience. How do you think Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are preparing for this one, if it's different at all from the last time?
Well, and hopefully they let the questioner say, well, you're not answering my question. I think it's a fundamental thing that everybody should have to do. But I think, you know, the knock on Donald Trump was that he wasn't prepared for the first debate, and it kind of showed, especially later on in the debate where he sort of started wandering off a little bit. The word is that he's preparing a lot more this time. Now, Donald Trump is an engaging person, and he speaks off the cuff, and as Max pointed out with Mike Pence, he's got media experience. You know, Hillary is probably seen as a little bit more off-putting, a little standoffish. I think she's going to have to try to connect with people, but she's been doing this a long time, and I think she knows what she's doing, and she comes, you know, Bill Clinton is one of the best, you know, everybody remembers the Bill Clinton town halls from the early 90s. So I think it's going to be a matter of whether Hillary can connect on that personal level and whether Donald Trump can maintain focus and be prepared.
So Heidi, answer this a little bit. So whose style does work better for this?
I think Trump's style works better because he's good with people in an arena, but that's where his problem comes into, because I think that's when he gets baited into saying his craziest things when he's working to the crowd. He's doing okay, the people like him, and then he feeds off their reactions, and then he's like, and here's the next crazy thing, you know? So I think it's a catch-22, a double-edged sword for him. And like Robert was saying, I think Hillary really is going to have to figure out how to be genuine, because she doesn't have like a resting face that, I don't know how to put it, but in her debate, she had these really weird reactions where she was just kind of like, you know, and so how do you like react and talk to people and be genuine? So Trump is sometimes too genuine as to who he is. She's going to have to figure out how to not be like over the top, super cheesy, trying to react to them, and genuinely listen and answer. So they both have their troubles with this style.
I'm going to disagree, because I think that a lot of times you'll hear Trump's criticism of Hillary Clinton's campaigning, and it is that she doesn't have these big crowds, she doesn't do these big arena things. Well, what she does do a whole lot more than Donald Trump is have discussions with voters. She actually goes to town halls, she does some of these things quite a lot, and she's ready to talk about anything that's thrown at her. If there's anything you know about Hillary Clinton, it's that she is studied up. If a voter asks her about a specific thing, she will, if voters, questions come out of nowhere with these things. We could get a voter who has a fantastic question about, let's say, sexual assault on Native American reservations. Hillary Clinton will know about that issue. Does Donald Trump know about it? And the second thing is Donald Trump's willpower. Can he rein himself in? Because he always calls himself a counterpuncher, you know, and that you don't counterpunch a town hall questioner, you know. It's and he could get in trouble if he does that.
Yeah, these are voters you're talking to, so he has to think about that. But I think Clinton, when she's off the cuff, though, sometimes gets that grouchy mom voice, like she just gets that angry kind of yelling voice, and it's like, okay, why are you yelling at me? Like, let's just talk nice here. So that'll be her thing.
I think we can agree that Clinton probably knows more about the issues and policy. The question is whether she can connect as well as Trump does.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a couple of issues that may come up. In the last 10 days, we've had a lot of information on Donald Trump, in particular about his tax returns. As we released a few pages of the 1995 tax returns, and maybe he hasn't paid his federal income tax for a couple decades. Max, does this have an impact?
Yes, I think it does, and I think the impact is when you're talking about who are the winnable voters. I don't know about you guys, but finding that person who's on the who's undecided on the edge, it's hard. Who are the winnable voters? Well, those voters might be thinking, you know what? I don't. The Clintons are a known commodity, and I don't really want another Clinton in the White House, but can I vote for this guy? And so things that come up that are revelatory and new, especially after Labor Day, now that the broader public is paying attention, they find out, you know what? Every single April, I sit down and I go on TurboTax and I fill out these forms and I try and figure out what I can take, and I'm still paying thousands of dollars in income tax. And they find out the guy with the jet is not paying a dime. That hurts.
Yeah. Okay, we need to switch gears for just a moment. We're going to go to you, Robert, the 2nd Congressional District. Right. We had a chance to watch a debate this week, Charlene Albaran and Chris Stewart, and I think not many people thought it was going to be as feisty as it was.
It was,
I know you had a chance to watch it and report on it. Sometimes it seems there's an advantage for someone that has no political experience really coming to these debates. How do you think that exchange played out, and why do you think it was so tense?
Well, I think anytime you're the challenger, especially a challenger who's trailing, you're going to go into the debate and you're going to go after your opponent pretty hard. And I think that she did that. She needed to score some points. Probably her only opportunity to do it was in this forum, and it was certainly her highest profile opportunity to do it. And so she came out swinging, and some of the punches landed. She got hit back a few times. I think is it going to change the course of the election? Probably not. But I think she was able to make her case. There were some, and it was a stark contrast. These are two very different candidates on fundamental levels. I mean, we're talking about, one of them, Charlene Albaran, supports the creation of the Bears Ears. Congressman Stewart opposes it. There were distinct differences between these two candidates, and the voters have a clear difference. But again, she needed to go in there guns blazing, and Chris Stewart just needed to try to fend that off and maintain his lead. And so that's why I think you ended up with some of this back and forth. But it also seemed to get a little personal sometimes, and especially when I think in the intro there was the would you at least be honest with the people, and she said, I am being honest. I don't know if you are. It's sort of an I know you are, but what am I kind of exchange. It got a little personal, I think.
And certainly did. Heidi, I know you watched that. Were there any parts of that where you thought that maybe he needed to fend it off a little more, or that he did it perfectly?
No, I don't think he did it perfectly, but my question is always how many people are watching these. I think people should be watching them. I don't know how many did. The one thing that I thought was offsetting with her is that she didn't know where her district was, and she had to keep defending that she only lived in Park City one day and it was out of her district, which you can live out of. But yeah, so it was kind of interesting. So I would think that's the one thing you should know going in, where's your district? Do I live in it? And do I know who the people are that I'm going to be talking to and representing in Washington? So, but yeah, she came in there feisty and put up a fight. And I think that a lot like Donald Trump, she's not a practiced politician. So she comes in there and was very open and honest about how she felt and wasn't, I guess, controlled in her speech, because she was new.
You know, and another thing, there's another way you can watch these debates. I mean, I think a lot of people, probably even in this program, heard Alberon and thought, isn't that the planet that blew up in Star Wars? I mean, it is, there's not a lot of people paying attention to these races. Honestly, Charlene Alberon, unless something extraordinary happens, is not going to win. But it's useful to watch this debate and see somebody put these questions to the congressman, because things come out like you're talking about with Bears Ears or with other issues. You can see where the congressperson stands.
Well, let's talk about one of the other races, because we also had a debate this last week with the governors, Governor Herbert and Michael Weinholz, who is a local Utah business person who's been very successful in that regard. But the percentages are also not there. But they had very different approaches. Max, maybe take a second on one of the key issues was education funding, where Michael Weinholz said, I would put a 7/8% increase in taxes for education, specifically for that. How does that play for Utah voters?
You know, every single time you see a poll where Utah voters are asked, would you pay more taxes if it helped your local schools? They say absolutely. I mean, it's not even close that people will say, yeah, if I want my schools to get more money, so if this is going to schools. But you get in an election, and Governor Herbert has the resources, and when it's the candidate who says, I want to increase taxes, the candidate who says, no, things are fine without it, I think that plays in a different way.
Yeah, and I don't think people are always honest. It's like when we do polls for television, people say, I want to see cat videos and happy stories and community stuff. But when it comes down to it, they want to see the bad things that happen in their community. They want to know the murders. They want to know the fights. So I think it's easy to say, yeah, I want that 7/8%. I think it's super important for education because everyone's always yelling about education. But when it comes down to it, how many of these bonds are we passing for schools when we've got kids on year-round double session? It's easy to say, I really, really want to support it, and I'll give you my 7/8 till you have to vote for it, and then it's like, I don't really want it. Yeah.
Well, I think it's kind of sticks in Utah voters' craw that we're still last in the nation. We keep hearing about how much the economy is growing and how everything's great, but we're still last in the nation, and by quite a bit. And so the only way you're going to do that, again, and this goes to Michael Weinholz's point, is either grow the economy, as Governor Herbert says, or raise taxes. And so the 7/8% thing is actually a proposal that's coming out of from Education First, which is a group of business leaders. I mean, this is not something that's coming from the left. This is not a Democratic idea. This is something that's coming from business leaders. And Michael Weinholz said, yeah, we'll accept that. You know, I support that. He also supports a millionaire tax or an increase in the tax rate for those making over $250,000 a year. Together, he's talking about $600 million, and that's a big chunk of money, though. Going to Heidi's point.
Let's switch gears for just a second, because all of these policies have people out there that we can measure how they like it or they don't like it. And we start measuring our candidates based on these to some extent. And one of the polls, and something we just really released just yesterday with the Tribune, with the Hinckley Institute and the Salt Lake Tribune, is some favorability numbers on some of these candidates. And all these issues wrap up into it. One of the most interesting ones, Robert, maybe you could take a second on, is maybe first tell us what goes into a favorability rating. And then let's talk about a couple very key figures that are very interesting this week.
Well, I mean, a favorability rating at its core, I guess, is sort of a popularity contest, right?
It's high school over again.
Have these guys done anything that makes me not like them? And otherwise, I think, especially in Utah, you kind of get the benefit of the doubt. So the favorability rating is just, you know, a voter's general impression of this individual. And so that was the question that was put to them, a favorable or unfavorable opinion of those individuals.
So Heidi, we had some very interesting numbers this week. In this poll, we decided to go out and ask for favorability numbers. We certainly on the governor, which is very high at 70%. But two people that have been part of our political culture for a while, Mitt Romney and John Huntsman Jr., both were part of this poll. Both of them hit 71% in terms of their favorability ratings. What do you make of such a high regard for these two candidates?
I feel like hindsight's always 20/20, and you're sort of grading on a curve because both of them lost favorability. I mean, even Mitt Romney a couple months ago when he came and spoke with the Hinckley Institute at the University of Utah with that Never Trump speech, people kind of backlashed, and I don't think he was expecting that. And so there's been a little bit of anger with Mitt Romney over the last couple of months, but obviously that's going away. And I think in the last election, too, Utah didn't throw their support. They weren't loving John Huntsman Jr. I think they were upset that he went to work for Obama and left. I think that some people were not thrilled in Utah that he was talking about his religion as a historical aspect of his life, but not part of it. And so people soured on him a little bit. But now when they're looking at the options out there, they're remembering the good old days. We were talking earlier, it's like you have a baby, you know, give it a couple of years, you forget that it's rough, the pregnancy, and you want to do it again. So we love him.
Can you imagine if one of their names were on the ticket instead of Trump in Utah? You look at the polls and Trump getting somewhere around 40% of the vote in Utah. And I mean, can you imagine if it was a Huntsman against Hillary Clinton or Romney against Hillary Clinton? 80%.
The most interesting thing about these numbers, though, is where their support's coming from, because as you break down the poll, you have sort of the middle ground who likes both John Huntsman and Mitt Romney. And then you've got the conservative or the Republican end of the wing who like Mitt Romney, and then you've got the Democrats who are actually more supportive of John Huntsman. And I think maybe look fondly back on the good old days when you had a guy out there who they thought maybe was a little bit more of a moderate. And so I think it's interesting where that support's coming from, because they both have this middle of the road stuff, but they're the differences on the ends of the spectrum.
Okay, but
last comment here.
The weird thing, though, and I'll make this super short, is that Huntsman is the one who is supporting Trump. And so now, Huntsman, who all the Republican Democrats love, is supporting Trump, and now the Democrats are loving what Romney's saying.
Oh, boy. Now, this has been a very interesting conversation. I can hardly wait to see what happens. Sadly, it's going to come to an end soon on this election cycle. Thank you so much for all of you. That is it for the Hinckley Reports. For more political analysis and news of the week, please check out our Hinckley Report Web Extra online. We will be back next week. Thank you and good night.